Roberto De Zerbi is the latest coach in the hot seat of Tottenham Hotspur, a position that looks more like a poison chalice rather than the plum assignment the stature and size of the club dictates that it should be. One thing is for sure, we cannot blame injuries on the style of play of any particular coach. It is clear that there's something rotten in the state of Denmark, and it's not an Arsenal Cup holding former gaffer. Our medical department has allegedly been revamped twice in recent history, and the LinkedIn job posting for a psychologist might well be for whoever's looking after the welfare of the players, because it seems to be a fraught and onerous task. First, let's take stock of the records of the three managers we've had this season. Roberto De Zerbi has 1.75 points per game in his first 4 games, and while that is a small sample size, extrapolate this over the course of a 38-game season and we'll finish with 66 points. Good enough for 4th or 5th in the past 3 seasons. One area you'll be surprised to see De Zerbi being worse than Frank and Tudor is expected goals, where his 1.26 is actually lower than Tudor's 1.36 and Frank's 1.4. Where De Zerbi has actually made the biggest difference is expected goals allowed, which is 0.93, a significant improvement over Tudor's 2.34 and Frank's 1.84. This means that De Zerbi is conceding less good chances to opposition. Now, it's easy to think that because we think of De Zerbi as an attacking coach who likes his teams to possess the ball, that expected goals would automatically improve, but we have to reckon with the injuries of Xavi and Solanke, which added to the long-term absences of Kudus, Maatsen, Kulusevski and Odebear, meaning that attacking options are thin. So why then is expected goals allowed the biggest improvement? One thing about De Zerbi's press and the way that he tries to possess the ball means that we spend a lot more time defending in the opposition half, in hopes of disrupting their build-up before they get into dangerous positions. That means that attacks are reduced at source, and Aston Villa's low expected goals of 0.62 and solitary shot on target are examples of what we can expect from this style of defense. Keeping possession also means that the opposition has less of the ball to hurt us with, compared to when we spend more time defending in the mid to low block hoping to counter teams as we did under previous managers. Now, the player that has made the biggest difference in our build-up play has been Antonin Kinsky. Kinsky's comfort on the ball is a huge upgrade in this regard. His stats on the ball, composure under pressure, and even his ability to manipulate pressing opponents with his movement are truly a joy to watch. His mid-range passing also gives us more avenues to attack our opposition teams with. Other areas of the statistics which are interesting are pressures per defensive action, showing that teams on average had 10.5 touches before being pressed. But when you drill down into the individual games, we actually averaged above 11 in PPDA for Sunderland and Brighton, and halved our PPDA for Wolves and Villa, indicating that our press was twice as intense in the 2 most recent games, and our expected goals allowed also halves, and our game control increases dramatically. What PPDA measures is the intensity of the press, but it doesn't tell you whether the pressure was coordinated or effective. Now, on-ball pressure counts the number of presses that pressure the ball carrier, while off-ball pressure measures the number of presses that pressure the passing lanes or options of the opponent. What pressure share does is it takes the ratio of pressure on and off the ball in relation to total pressures. This establishes whether a team pressures the ball carrier or the passing options and lanes. Now, if we look at De Zerbi's tenure so far, he averages the lowest PPDA of all our coaches, so the highest intensity, allowing opponents the least time to settle in possession. On top of that, the pressure exerted is mostly on the ball carrier, but also on the passing lanes and options. This suggests that the press isn't just intense and high tempo, but it's also organized and cohesive. To the eye test, something that I observed right at the start of the Villa game, when Gallagher led the press, was the close coordination that he had between Richarlison and Bentancur. They were pressing as a pack, maintaining distance with each other to support ganging up on central midfielders like Tielemans and Barkley, while constantly scanning to ensure that the men they left behind were picked up by Danso or Van de Ven jumping up. Now, while Romero is arguably our most technically gifted centre-back, his decision-making and tackling intensity is highly driven by his emotional state and individual judgment. And we've seen multiple circumstances this season where that has left him either sent off, injured, or caught out. In the ZERBI'S system, the aggression and choices of how high and aggressively to press are determined by the system, and Bentancur and Richarlison seem more disciplined about calibrating their intensity and positioning to fit this system. One thing I noticed about how the press was setting pressing traps, where Lindeloff was left as the most obvious open man for Martinez to pass to, and once he received the ball, Spurs would aggressively press him while cutting off central passing options. The other pressing trap was to leave a narrow passing lane for central midfielders like Tielemans and Barkley, but for Gallagher and Bentancur, as well as Richarlison, to very aggressively close them down to turn over possession. I also noticed that Maatsen was frequently isolated and blocked from receiving the ball. It seems that Roberto De Zerbi didn't relish the idea of Maatsen taking on Porro, and Palhinha was also tasked with covering that flank to add security. Palhinha and Bentancur, otherwise known as the Bentinha black hole of backwards and sideways passing under Frank, has been revitalized. And I think it's a great example of how profiling players and making tweaks to leverage on their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses can completely change the complexion of the squad. Palhinha is one of the best tacklers in Europe, but struggles to receive the ball on the turn and progress the ball. So having Palhinha fight for second balls and build up, tackle opponents breaking through the press is a great use of his talents. While positioning him in possession as a right centre-back or right-back allows him to face the play and give him time on the ball to use his decent mid-range switch of play. We always knew that Bentancur had the ability to contribute a lot more in build-up play from his time under Conte, and a big part of the frustration of his performances under Frank was how frequently he played safe backwards sideways passes rather than progress the ball. We now see that he never really lost the ability to do so, but might have been coached to favour passing the ball to Kudus, as that was very much the theme of chance creation under Frank. Frank's press, in comparison, felt disjointed and uncoordinated. I distinctly remembering many occasions where the striker, often Tel or Muani, would frequently press the opposition centre-backs alone and get frustrated with being easily bypassed because he was pressing alone and not as part of a coordinated pack. The numbers bear out the reduced pressing intensity, resulting us frequently retreating into a deeper block. Under Tudor, it frequently felt like the team were chasing shadows and trying to chase passing options and lanes rather than pressuring the ball carrier, because the lack of organizational cohesion meant our players rarely even managed to reach the ball before being bypassed. The effect of this showed in our results and our expected goals against and expected threat against, Tudor's record for both statistics being the worst among our three gaffers. As a whole, Roberto De Zerbi's possession play hasn't really created that many chances. In fact, his XG is the lowest of the three managers. But Spurs dictates the pace and tempo of the game more in possession, meaning we transition quickly when the opposition is disorganized, or are able to slow the game down and rest in possession when we want to take the sting out of the game. An important note about the trajectory of the way that we're pressing has dramatically improved in the Wolves and Villa games, almost double the intensity and on-ball share of pressures, while decreasing the quality of chances created against us. In particular, the press against Villa was dramatically more coordinated, with Villa often failing to get out of their own half, and players like Maatsen, Tielemans and Morgan Rogers overwhelmed by packs of Spurs players. Gallagher, Palhinha, Porro and Bentancur in particular were tigerish about ensuring Villa players did not have time on the ball, and the goal conceded at the end was from Bergwijn failing to close down Bailey, resulting in Cash having the separation from Udogie to cross in from Buendia, exemplifying the importance of maintaining that level of intensity. Defensive solidity is a base to build on, but De Zerbi's approach shows why it's quite different when it's in your opponent's half. The turnovers are less costly, and there's more time to recover and rectify the situation. Additionally, successful defense in a high press often creates attacking chances by disrupting the opponent in build-up when the structure is still transitioning to attack and therefore not in a settled defensive shape. Our use of possession is something that has room for improvement. There's very little you can do when you lose almost all of your creative ball progressors, wingers and passers like Maddison, Kulusevski, Kudus, Xavi and Odobert. Even so, De Zerbi has used Gallagher, Bentancur, Tel and Muani admirably in the Villa game to provide some creativity despite the ongoing and persistent injury apocalypse. Our continuously improving game control share is also a positive sign that our trajectory of improvement to the eye test is backed up by some of the underlying numbers. Overall, the teething problems of misprofiling in the Sunderland game seem to be resolved. The Brighton game was an impressive performance against a team in form that was undone by a late equaliser, and the Wolves game was a positive result despite not being the most compelling viewing. The Villa result really represents a coming of age for the team in terms of seeing results for their application, and the best display of a coordinated press I've seen from this team so far. It's a performance that united fans around the team, with many performances, especially those from Palhinha, Gallagher, Porro, Danso, Richarlison and Van de Ven, showing the passion that the fans demand, supported by a system that no longer wastes that effort by structuring it effectively against opposition teams, by maximizing the strengths of our squad and compensating for its limitations with coordination and better profiling and positioning.